Clear prop.
Star 738, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exited in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I'm fantastic. This week we are going to go to the well of some of the things that our listeners asked us for. And this probably came in 4 or 5 times. And if you have show ideas, please don't hesitate to send them our way. We love to do what you want us to do. This week is all about aircraft ownership versus renting aircraft. And I think when this comes up for me a lot, it's normally about the flight training portion. We both own I guess this is where I got one up on you. You have 24,000 flight hours, but I have 12 aircraft. You only have 2. So that's me versus you.
There you go.
But the ownership piece is one that's how I ended up in this business. That's why I own a flight school, because I was thinking about buying a plane. And I know you have 2 planes that you fly, and your daughters have done their training in those aircraft as well. Initial thought process to you, Wally, when you say you own 2 aircraft, what made you buy 2 aircraft, and did you think you'd own those 2 aircraft?
Well, I can go back to the full gamut of aircraft ownership. I have, in my lifetime, owned 5 airplanes, partnership in one of them, actually 2 of them. And if prior to buying the current airplanes we've had, if you would have asked me the week before that if I would ever own an airplane, I would look at you like you're crazy. I would think, why would anybody in their right mind want to own an airplane? First airplane I ever owned was when I was a student pilot. My family bought a Cherokee 140, a Piper 140. And again, this is back in about 1982, somewhere around there. We bought a 1969 model Piper Cherokee 140, paid $8,000 for the airplane. And it was not well equipped. It had 1 NAVCOM, and that was basically it. And I got my private pilot certificate in that airplane. And you can sit here and say, "Whoa, $8,000 for an airplane." What you have to consider is, at the time, I was working at a pizza place, and minimum wage was $3.35 an hour. Today, now with the legislation that's before Congress, with a possible raise of minimum wage to $15 an hour, if you kind of do the comparison, that's the equivalent to about $35,000 today, which today you can't get a whole lot for $35,000. But anyway, we had that airplane, and I got my private in it, and then really kind of outgrew the airplane. It wasn't equipped to do instrument training other than basic instrument flying. So we ended up selling the airplane probably 18 months down the road for exactly what we paid for it. And I think at the end of the day, if you actually did the math and say, by the time we paid for insurance and maintenance and everything, we probably didn't really save a whole lot of money. But it was actually a good experience to own an airplane. Then we bought into a partnership in a Piper Arrow. And that worked out really well until I moved away, and the other partner bought our share out, and I was really done with aircraft ownership. I got into the next airplane really by accident. I was at a social event, and a friend and I started talking. He mentioned that he owned a Bonanza, and I think my eyes lit up when he mentioned that, because I asked him, I said, "Is it a V-tail Bonanza?" And he said, "Yes." And then it was funny, the questions I was asking him. I said, "Does it have a 3-bladed prop?" And he said, "Yes." And I thought, oh boy. And at that time I was probably drooling a little bit. And then he said, "Well, we're looking for a third partner in the airplane. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Well, what would it cost me?" And he told me what it would cost me. And it was really affordable. So I got into that partnership, and the partnership in that airplane worked great. All 3 of us were economically in about the same place, and philosophically we had the same philosophy as far as how we wanted to maintain the airplane. And our philosophy was if we were going to take the cowling off, we were going to pay a professional mechanic to do it. We weren't going to get out there and tinker with the airplane. And, other than putting fuel in it and adding oil and cleaning the airplane, that was basically all we were going to do to ourselves. And through circumstances, we ended up dissolving the partnership and selling the airplane. But at this point, I had already been bitten by the general aviation bug, and the convenience of having my own airplane was just too much. In the meantime, my daughters were learning to fly, so that's when we bought the 172.
And when you were in the Bonanza partnership, this wasn't in your college days. This was later in life, right? You were already a pilot at that point.
Yeah. This was just 5-6 years ago.
Gotcha. And so, for those last 30 years in between, you would have thought it's crazy to own a plane.
I would have thought that you had cucumbers growing out of your ears if you approached me about the thought of owning an airplane. I think, why would anybody want to own an airplane? Have the headache of it, the hassle of it, when you can simply go out to an airport and go to a flight school or an FBO and rent an airplane.
And you were flying jets and flying all over the world, so you didn't need more flight time necessarily. But
right.
you
Right.
then saw it more of a means towards your daughters and other things you're involved in. So let's, for the listeners, break down really kind of what options are out there from a ownership versus renting perspective. Obviously, there's flight schools like United Flight Systems here in Houston that provide rental of high quality aircraft with good avionics that you get to pick and choose from. They're handling the maintenance. They've got some fleet insurance. They're doing some things. That's the rental route. The next step up for that I normally talk about is really the club option, right? So
Right.
I am one of, let's call it 30 to 40 people that are paying monthly dues, probably some sort of a small buy-in to the club. That club's probably in some way or another talking about adding aircraft, improving or upgrading aircraft. There's probably a board or a small group that's leading that group. There's normally a waiting list. Those are pretty interesting groups of people, all probably fairly similar, who fly a little bit. The benefits there, probably less minimums if you want to take it on a long trip. Probably as a club member, you get one long trip a year and don't have to pay minimums, etc. Someone's maintaining it or helping maintain it, probably the board of that group. And you have access to the hangar and the aircraft probably when you want, or the club's going to have a problem and lose memberships, and they'll have to figure that out, right? But you don't necessarily own it, but you probably are a member owner of that club. They're all structured many, many different ways.
Right.
Then they have the partnership like you talked about. Some group, some smaller group, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys or girls have a similar desire. I see it on Facebook often. Hey, I'm looking to get into a 3-way partnership on a Cherokee 6. Any other 2 people out there interested? That happens. So normally there's a sight set on a type of aircraft, normally performance matrix. Hey, I want 2 people for a Cirrus, something like that, right? So then you're really a 1/3 partner in an aircraft, normally an LLC of some sort, that you and two something, sometimes 4, up to 4 other people are partners on that aircraft. And then you have to be like-minded. Like you said, the philosophy and the financial components are very, very big. You don't want, well, I would say I wouldn't want to be in a partnership like that with someone who was so frugal, so cheap, that if our front seats started getting worn out, they would not want to participate whatever their portion was to get that seat recovered, right? But that's not going to be any fun.
Right. I think those of you, those listeners who are of our age or older will remember a sitcom from back in the 70s, probably called The Odd Couple, maybe even in the 60s, I don't know. But it was two middle-aged men who were roommates, and they were just one was a slob and one was a neat freak, and that was the whole gist of the comedy, is what the Odd Couple. They were different. In an aircraft partnership, I think one thing that you want to look at is to make sure that you all the partners philosophically are on the same page. In other words, how are we going to maintain the airplane? You may have one guy who who is a tinkler, and he wants to come out and take that cowling off and do the oil change himself, gap the spark plugs or whatever, or whatever is allowed by the regulations. Where you may have another partner who doesn't want to have anything to do with that, and I think that's a discussion you certainly need to have with your potential partners before you go in. In other words, okay, if we need to replace the alternator, are we going to try to go for a rebuilt alternator? Are we trying to go for a new alternator? Just have those discussions ahead of time, so economically you are hopefully pulling the rope in the same direction.
Yeah, when I first really got into aviation, I found that a friend of mine that I had worked with in Austin for many years was an aircraft owner, much like this, in a partnership with two other people, and probably gave me one of my first few flights. I had been training, but he came down, picked me up, flew me to Galveston. I thought, wow, this guy just came from Austin, and we went to dinner in Galveston. How freaking cool is that? And I don't remember what he had. He's since upgraded, but I wanted, maybe it was an Aero. It was something high performance of the Cherokee nature. I don't remember what it was exactly, but he came to pick me up, low wing, and he talked about the partnership the whole time. And he had a really cool partnership. It was a Southwest captain who didn't fly very much, which meant the plane was available for him. They had a AMP that was part of the partnership that could do and did do all their work. They would all help, but obviously that he would be the one signing off on that said work. And then he was the third partner, and he was just a tech sales guy who was a pilot, right? So they had what I always thought, man, that's the quintessential partnership. You got a Southwest captain who's not going to tear it up, more than likely. AMP, who, if he does tear it up, can fix it. And then me, is what I was always dreaming about. And I don't remember what he said his partnership cost, but it was not that much money. And I was always thinking, oh my gosh, this is really obtainable at this point. And I think you made a really good point before we started recording, that your alternators were always 66% off when you bought one for that Bonanza, because there's two other people that are paying the other 2/3.
Right. And so it didn't make the bite so hard when, a $2,100 alternator was only $700. You almost felt like you were getting a good deal. One thing with a partnership, I think, that you need to address early on is scheduling. How are you going to schedule it? With one of our airplanes, what we did is my partner and I would sit down and we would assign each other weeks. And we'd start at the beginning of the month, the beginning of the year. And if the first of the year happened to fall, we would start midweek, because we figured that most people, when we took trips, it would probably be a weekend trip. So our weeks went Wednesday to Tuesday. And it's like, okay, I get week 1, you get week 2, I get week 3, you get week 4, and so forth. And the way we did it is, if you wanted to fly the airplane and it was your week, you just took the airplane. If you wanted to fly the airplane and it was the other guy's week, you just called him up and said, hey, I want to take the airplane on February 19th. You have anything going on? And there was never a conflict. With my other partnership on the Bonanza, we just had a Google Calendar, and when somebody wanted to use the airplane, you just put your name on it, and we would coordinate with each other. I remember there was one time where I scheduled the airplane on a Saturday to go to a local $100 hamburger place, and one of the partners called me up and said, hey, I need to, I need the airplane. I need to go up to Wyoming for something. And it was, it's pretty important. And of course I just said, yeah, absolutely, take the airplane. I can move my hamburger trip to next weekend. So that, it's something that you certainly want to address right off the bat. But we've never really had scheduling issues, but I could see it coming up possibly.
Yeah, and I think they used the Google Calendar, this gentleman that I was talking about from Austin, and I think he said maybe in the 2 years he was in the partnership, they had one real conflict that they had to resolve. And if that's all you really have to worry about with a 1/3 partnership in an aircraft, that's pretty dang good. So the next thing was really just outright ownership, and that would be you, the individual, buying the plane you want and owning it. Obviously, things don't get split amongst your partners. And then you get to do whatever you want to do with that aircraft. There's no scheduling conflicts. There's no issues. And I guess there's multiple stages of that. How nice of an aircraft do you buy? I see a lot of times, Wally, where someone buys something and I'm not even kidding. They outgrow it the first flight they fly it. They almost bring it home and they're like, man, I want something bigger and faster. It's a never-ending chase.
Yeah.
To buy a Vision Jet, no matter where they start.
Yeah.
Vision Jet's the outcome, and that's a little bit difficult to do for most. Some what happens, and I guess not everyone understands this or knows this, but there are people that buy planes like that then I guess get into a partnership with a flight school like this one, and they lease that aircraft back to a flight school, and then that flight school operates that aircraft for them, and then the owner of the aircraft obviously uses the same scheduling system to book it whenever they want to. But it's much like a piece of rental property that has a management company that's managing that property for them. They maintain it, they keep it, they insure it, they hangar it. If it's here, we wash planes. There's a contract between the two of us, but I think my leaseback partners are in pretty good hands here, and they get a lot of advantages for doing business with us. But it takes a plane that may sit as an individual owner. A plane could sit in a hangar or on a strip somewhere for days, if not weeks, and never get flown.
Right.
And so while there might be some disadvantages in some sense to a leaseback, there's a lot of advantages to keep that plane flying, keep it maintained, keep it going, and then not have a perfectly good working aircraft sitting on the tarmac somewhere just getting a sunburn. Yeah,
and I think people who want to buy an airplane will say, "Oh boy, I'm going to fly it every week," and life gets in the way, and weather gets in the way. And I find it with especially our Saratoga. I mean, I sit there and we have an app where we kind of keep track of the time, and I go back and I say, oh gee, this airplane hasn't flown in 3.5 weeks. I mean, I try to, I would like to fly it at least every couple of weeks, just to keep things moving in it, keep everything lubricated and so forth. I think I don't know what the average for a person owning an airplane, not in a partnership, but just one person owning an airplane. I don't know what the average amount of time put on a general aviation airplane is, but I would venture to say the vast majority do not fly 100 hours a year. And, that's 2 hours a week, an average of 2 hours a week. I think pretty much every annual I have done on an airplane, when they sign off an annual, they'll sign it off as 100 hours as well. I think I'm within the 100 hours on pretty much every airplane I've ever owned, with the exception of the 172 we have now, which is flying a little bit more. We're actually going to have to do a 100-hour inspection on it.
And so to put that in perspective, then you start talking about the expense thereof, right? And how do you account for those expenses, or how do you deduce that? So I guess we'll run through a little bit of math here, right? If a 172 rents for the $125 to $140 an hour, what's it going to cost you to operate that 10 hours a month to get that back? So right off the bat, my math would be, I'll go on the high side of that and say, if I'm going to spend $1,400 a month, if that convenience isn't worth that much to me for those 10 hours, then I'm out of balance probably right off the bat. And you go to a club. Some clubs charge monthly dues of $250, and then you pay some lesser amount. We'll call it $80 to $90 for every flight hour, because they've built in their maintenance and those sorts of things. If that adds up to be more than that $1,400, and you're going to fly 10 hours a month, the big difference there really is convenience, right?
Right.
The money, the likelihood that you ever do it cheaper than just renting is probably fairly unlikely if you only fly 10 hours a month.
Right. And when you say convenience, I would say scheduling convenience, because an example of our Saratoga, we came in a couple of weeks ago and determined that we had a nav light in up. And if I had rented that airplane, I could have just gone to the front desk and say, hey, the left nav light on the airplane is out. and gone home and not worried about it. It's not my expense. And so, buying a new light bulb and putting it in myself and realizing that it wasn't the light bulb at all, it was the power supply. And $600 later, I have a working nav light, which it had to be done, but that's the advantage of renting. It's not your problem. It's your problem to make the appropriate squawk and let the owner know about it. But if it is your airplane, it's your financial burden.
Yeah, and I think I'm almost numb to bad news nowadays. I mean, you hear something that's wrong, and I am worst case scenario guy in most cases already, so I always think the worst. Since we met this morning, I got a text from my mechanic that said, "Can you come look at this?" That's probably the most disheartening text messages that I can ever get. This one was nothing, so it was just something he wanted to show me. Thank goodness there was no 4-digit price tag coming at the end of this one this time. So
yeah,
it can weigh on you. And again, that's where I think you have to have a mindset of, I'm going to maintain this stuff at this level and then stick to that, or you'll just, you will drive your anxiety level through the roof for sure.
Oh, definitely. I get, my mechanic will call me and give me updates, and it's like you said, he usually doesn't tell me good news. It's usually bad news. And there have been times where I've gotten a text from him and says, "Call me when you can," and I've put off the call because I was maybe in the middle of doing something. I'm thinking, oh boy, I don't want this extra anxiety. And when I did call him, he said, "I just want to let you know we've got the airplane all done, with the exception of one little thing, and we expect to have that done tomorrow morning, and we should have you all buttoned up by noon tomorrow." And I sat there in silence, going, "Okay, what else?" Well, that's it. And I went, "Okay, well that was not painful."
That was not painful at all. So I think I've seen it on Facebook memes and other things. If you can't take $100 bill out of your wallet right now and just light it on fire, you should never buy a plane. I don't think it's quite that bad, but at the same time, there are things that are going to surprise you. And if we just stick to that math for a second, say $1,400 a month, that's going to go pretty quick in the aviation world, right? Your fuel's going to be your biggest expense, more than likely. Today at this airport, it's $4.24 a gallon. You're going to do at least, let's say, for math, we'll say 10 gallons an hour, right? So that's $42 an hour in fuel. 10 hours, that's $420 something in fuel. Hangar's going to be $300 or $400, $500. So just the fuel in the hangar is going to be $800. It's going to take over half of that money right out of your till for what you're thinking about from a rental perspective, or what it would cost to rent for those 10 hours. So lots to think about there. Never mind insurance, never mind holdbacks for engine, holdbacks for insurance and stuff like that. I joke when people say, you must be making hay. You own a busy flight school. They don't understand the inner workings and just how there's a lot of hidden costs in there that it's pretty amazing. You can go rent a very expensive aircraft for $150 an hour and go rent it, come back, squawk a couple things, and get in your car and drive home and never think the wiser of it. There's a lot that goes into maintaining that aircraft for sure.
I would just say, if you are thinking about aircraft ownership, really get down and think of the mission that you're buying the airplane for. Is this something to go piddle around with on weekends, or do I really want to use this airplane as a cruiser? Do I want to use it to go places? Do I want to take my family with me? I think if you wanted to go places, I would say you're probably not going to be really happy with a 172 or a Warrior. You're going to outgrow that because you're going to say, geez, this thing only does 100 knots, 105 knots or whatever. I think you're going to want something bigger, and bigger is more expensive, higher insurance premiums, all that kind of stuff. So just be very careful about the mission and try to find an airplane that meets the mission.
Yeah, that's a great point. We talked about many people that I've talked to outgrow the aircraft on the first flight. They want more. They want more. if you can't afford what you really need or want, I would caution you on trying to meet somewhere halfway. You'll just never be happy with it. You won't end up using it, and it'll be a hanger rat that unfortunately would sit, right? But it could be the perfect aircraft for someone else's needs. So I would think that way. I get asked quite a bit, and this is something we didn't talk about, but I can find twin engine aircraft so much cheaper. Are they really twice as much to operate and afford and keep or not? I think, to my perspective, I own a twin engine aircraft that is quite nice, quite powerful, could get you really around the country if you wanted to. But there's a safety mechanism that I don't think people think about. There's two folds, I guess. One, you probably are less likely to have an incident that would make you need to land, forced landing, because you got those two engines. But if you're not a proficient twin engine pilot, that's a lot to handle. So make sure you are proficient, that you really know the aircraft, and don't just depend on it. But they might be a little cheaper and trade a plane or those sorts of things, but it is twice the fuel, twice the prop, twice the engine, twice the annual. Always got gear that they have to fix or look at on those annual inspections. So it does get a lot more expensive to operate a twin. And I'm just not sure. If I had my pick between the 182 and the twin, I'm probably flying the 182 somewhere, just because I'm only losing about 8 knots.
Right.
And I can definitely land that 182 in a lot tighter spots if I was forced to land. And it's just not as much aircraft. So a single pilot resource, me and my family, and not a crew, I'm taking the 182 95% of the time for sure.
Well, and this was a concept that's a very simple concept, but it's something to think about. In a twin-engine airplane, you're twice as likely to have an engine failure than in a single-engine airplane. You've got 2 engines. So, the likelihood of something going wrong mechanically is double, because you've got double the parts. Now, the math equation that I always use is, in a single-engine airplane, 1 minus 1 is 0. In other words, you got one engine, that one engine quits, now you've got 0. And in a twin-engine airplane, 2 minus 1 is still 1. You've got 1 left. So there are some advantages to it. I was up at my airport about a year ago, and I drove by the hangar of a friend who owned a Baron. He doesn't have the Baron anymore. He's got a Bonanza. But anyway, at the time he had a Baron, and he was changing the spark plugs. And I just started doing the math. At the time, all I had was the 172. So I had a 172 4-cylinder engine, so a total of 8 spark plugs. And I'm just doing the math, and I'm going, okay, about $30 a piece for spark plugs, about $240 to change the spark plugs. And I'm looking at his airplane, 6 cylinders times 2, 12 cylinders, that's 24 spark plugs. That's $750 to change the spark plugs in his airplane. So I just kind of went, wow, that's a game changer right there.
Yeah, and the fuel burn. I mean, you're talking 2 180 horse, 200 horsepower engines, maybe 240s on each side on a Baron, and that's going to be 25 gallons an hour.
Yeah.
So you might get there quicker, but you're going to spend a lot more money in that hour that you're in the air for sure.
Right.
So one real quick recap. We talked a little bit about renting. We talked about the clubs. We talked about partnerships. We talked about ownership, partial ownership, and then maybe even leasing back to a flight school. Lots of different options out there. If you want to be an aircraft owner, you have an individual question, don't hesitate to send us an email, bobby@behindtheprop.com and wally@behindtheprop.com. As always, stay safe, fly safe, and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at behindtheprop.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.